Hello, and welcome to today's Saratech Enablement Series. My name is Sarah Utsugi, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at Saratech, and I'll be your host today. Presenting today, we have Allison Redderson-Lear, who's a mechanical engineer at Saratech, and she'll be talking to you about using Femap API to automate results visualization. All right. Hi, Allison. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hey, Sarah. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Saratech?
So I'm an engineer here at Saratech, and I have been for almost 6 years now. And I mostly do API work like we're about to see, but I also do analysis and some design.
Nice. Well, we're excited to hear what you have to share with us today. Why don't you go ahead and share your agenda and take it away?
All right, sounds good. So first off, I'm going to talk about the output vector IDs in Femap 2020.1 and above. And then we're going to get into actually putting a little API together. And that's going to cover things like setting the contour output set and vector IDs, setting the background view color, and saving an image of the graphics window. So let's get started. First of all, in Femap 2020.1 and above, some output vector IDs have changed. So for example, plate bottom von Mises stress used to be 7433, and now it's 9033. So if you have any old APIs, legacy APIs, that kind of thing, you will need to update them to use these new output vector ID ranges. And we're going to talk about that pretty soon here. But let me go over to Femap. So you can see I've just created a very basic model here. And what I want to do is write an API. So I have the API programming window over here. If you don't see it for some reason, you can go up to Tools and select it in the list and it'll show up. But I'm just going to click this tab and pin it open so that it stays open. So first of all, I want to save an image of this graphics window. That's a very basic thing to do, so I'm going to start there. So first, I'm going to create a variable for the file name for this image. And don't worry too much if you don't understand all of the things that I'm typing here on the screen. Let me zoom in a little bit to make sure you can read that. But yeah, if not all of this makes sense, don't worry about it. Later on, I'll be talking about different ways that you can get up to speed and stuff like that. So I'm going to set this file name to be something simple. I'll just call it contour. And now I need to actually save an image of my graphics window. So to do that, I'm going to use the application method. So I'll use app.fe file picture save. And I can see that I have two options here. I have picture save and picture save 2. So what I can do is select one of them, put my cursor inside this word here, and press the F1 key. And I'll drag this over, and that just opens up the programming help for whatever method or property you have your cursor in. In this case, I can see at the bottom, this method is obsolete, and I should be using file picture save 2. And I can see that's just the next one on the list. So the first argument we want here is, if true, this function runs interactively and displays a dialog box. And for this instance, maybe I want to generate a whole bunch of images and just dump them into a folder so that I can share them with a customer or something like that. I don't want a dialog showing up if I need to go through, 100 different output sets or something. So I'm going to use false for that. The next one is the save region. That can be the graphics window, the layout, or your entire desktop. I think for this, I just want my graphics window. Next up is the format. And you can see there's a list of different file formats here. I am just going to use the JPEG format. And finally, the file name. We've already created a variable for that, so we should be okay. Drag this back out of the way here. Okay, so we're using picture save 2, like I said. And we have this handy autocomplete that pops up here. So the first one is whether we want to use a dialog or not. Like I said, I don't want a dialog, so I'm just going to use false there. Next is the save region. We can either save the entire desktop, our Femap layout, or just the graphics window. I just want the graphics window, so I'm going to go with that. Next up is the file format. Like I said, I'm going to use JPEG. You can just go down and double click there. And finally, the file name. This does need to be the full path, so I'll put it in my Scratch directory. I'll use an ampersand to stick these strings together. And there we go. I'll scroll back over to the side and expand this a little bit so we can see everything. And that should just about do it. So I'm going to go ahead and click this green play button up here. And it looks like we ran into a problem. Yep, I just forgot an as right there. So I'm going to click play again. You can see it runs, takes a minute to create that image file. And I'll go into my Scratch directory and make sure that that was created correctly. So yep, that's my graphics window. So now that I have sort of a basis to work off of, now I can start getting a little bit more fancy. So now I can change this background color. Right now it's white, but while I'm working, maybe I'll usually change the background color to something a bit darker, maybe a dark blue or something like that. I might make it shaded. And that just makes it easier to see some of these really light colored things like curves and nodes. It kind of makes them stand out more. But if I'm putting this in an analysis report, then I don't want this blue background, right? I want a white background. I want to save that printer ink. So I'm going to make the background white. So to do that, first I want to create a variable to represent our view. So there's my view variable. And then I'll create a variable to hold the view ID. And you'll see why we need this in just a second here. So now I need to get the active view. So I'm going to use the application method, FEApp, get active view. And this one is pretty straightforward, but again, if I need help on this, I can put my cursor in there and press F1, or I can go up to Help, Programming, and search from there. But I happen to know that this only requires a view ID variable. So now that I've done that, then the active view ID is stored in this variable. And I can load that into my view object. So to do that, I'm going to use the view.get method and put in my view ID. So now that we've populated our view object, I can go and set the background options. So I will say view dot, and maybe off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what that's going to be. So I'll go up to Help, Programming. I'll drag my window back over here. And I'll scroll down to Entity Objects, scroll down to View Objects, and take a look at the properties on our view object. And you can see there's quite a list here. If you do need to work with the view object at some point, it could be handy to read through this and just to understand what your options are. So scrolling through this, I can see that. I'm going to move this to my other screen so that I can type at the same time. The properties that I'm interested in are window back color. And I want to set that to be white. So the autocomplete comes up with this handy list here. So I'll just scroll down to the white. And since it's shaded right now, I want to make sure it's set to unshaded. So the property I want to use for that is going to be window shade back. And I want to set that to false because I don't want it to be shaded. So now that I've made some changes to my view object, I can put that into our Femap application. So I'm going to use cview.put. And it's asking for an entity ID here. So I'm just going to use the cview.id to just put that ID right in there. And like we sometimes need to do in Femap, I'm going to regenerate the view. So now that I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and click play. And you can see our background changed to white. And I'll double check to make sure my image got saved correctly. And yep, there it is. Okay, so I've got my image, I've got my nice white background to put in my analysis report. Now I need to set the contour options. So if I were to do that in the user interface, I go to the post-processing toolbox, select my output set and output vector. But we want to do this with the API. You know, maybe I have 100 different output sets, or I need, maybe I only have 10, but I need 7 different output vectors for each of those 10. So doing this with API is going to be way easier than doing it by hand. So let's see here. I need to use my view object to set the contours. So I'm going to say cview.contour equals FCF contour. And you can see I have a couple different options here, and you probably recognize some of those from this drop down up here. I'm going to stick to the regular old contour. I can say cview.output set. And this is going to be my output set. In this model, I only have one output set, and it has an ID of 1, so I'm just going to stick that right in there. And now I need to set the output vector. Oops, that's not the right one. This is going to be contour data v2. And just a quick note, in Femap 2020 and above, you will see a lot of v2 in there. And that's because they did make some changes to output in particular and how that's handled. So if you see a lot of v2, that is the reason why. So for this, I'm just going to set it to, I don't know, 2, we'll say, just because I want to make sure that what I have here works. I don't want to get too fancy. So I'm just going to press play. It'll churn for a second, and you can see that this changed from total translation to T1 translation. And again, I can open up my image to validate that it was created. I can see that, yep, that's T1 translation down there. So we're good to go here. So now we need to figure out what we want our output vector ID to be. And you know, that's not too hard to figure out. I can go up here and just find the vector ID in this list. But later on, if, say, the output vector ID changes again, maybe Siemens goes back and updates those ranges again. I do want this to be able to work with that. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back up here and I'll create a results ID query object. So I'm going to say vec ID query as femap.results ID query. And just to make this a little easier, I'm going to create a variable to hold our output vector ID as well. Okay, and now I can put this to good use. I will go ahead and use a single quote to comment out this line. And I want to assign a value to my output vector ID. So I'll use my vec ID query object. And you have a lot of options with this one. You can see we have a list of different element types. In this case, my model is just plates, so I'm interested in plate IDs. Now I need to give it a results type. I'm interested in stress in this case. Let's say I want von Mises stress. I'm going to select that for my next argument. Let's take top von Mises stress. And here we have the option to select if we want the stress at one of the corners or if we want it at the centroid. I want it at the centroid, so I'm just going to put that in. Okay, so this should spit out an output vector ID that corresponds to the top von Mises stress at the centroid of my plate elements. Now, similar to what I had before, I can say cview.contour data v2 equals out vec ID. And I'll go ahead and click play. And you can see that this changed to plate top von Mises stress. I'll reopen my image to make sure it looks right. And there we go. In theory, I could go through and make a whole big loop to go through this. Maybe I want to loop through a whole bunch of different models. Basically, the idea is that I want to use this application to save myself time. You know, I want to spend time doing engineering work. I want to do analysis. I don't want to spend time going through and clicking this button over and over, selecting my output set, taking a screenshot, saving it to a folder, et cetera, et cetera. So let me go back to my slides here. So like I said, we can use the Femap API to rapidly generate post-process images for analysis reports or memos. I know a lot of customers that I've worked with for, informal reports, just, take a screenshot of the graphics window, stick it in a PowerPoint and send it to me. Or maybe I need to show the design team where there's a problematic area, there's a high stress here we need to address. I can just use this to spit out a PowerPoint slide for them and shoot it off for them. The other thing that I do want to highlight again is that output in the Femap API has changed in versions after 2020.1. And there are other changes beyond what I mentioned here today, but we will be talking about those in a later session. So if you do need help with API, one of your most powerful assets are the custom tools. So let me go back to Femap for a quick minute. If you go up here to the custom tools toolbar, if you go down and take a look at these, you have your data table, element update, event callback. These are just simple APIs that are shipped with Femap by default. And if you go to your Femap installation folder, let me pull that up here. In your Femap installation folder, if you go into the API folder, you can see that just like we had, data table, element update, etc. here, we have those exact same folders here. So if I go into the data table folder, I can have, say, get change column width. If I go back to custom tools, data table, I have get change column width. So everything that's available to you here, you can view the source code directly in these folders. This .bas extension, that's just a text file. I can right click this and open it up in Notepad. And this one is pretty short. But if you're getting started with API, you can just take a look at some of these, see what they do, how they work, go through and edit them, make changes to them, and just go nuts, get experimenting, figure out what works and what doesn't, etc. I'll go back to the slides. And again, we're here to help. In addition to this particular session, we also have other recordings on YouTube, some shorter tips and tricks videos. And we do offer API training and mentoring. And that API training is going to cover everything from the basics of programming to the specifics of programming with Femap. So if you're new to programming or even new to Femap, our API training will be valuable for you.
All right, so if there are any questions, please feel free to enter them into the questions panel. It does look like we have a few questions to start with. So the first is, I've written Excel/Office macros before. Is Femap API similar?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the API programming window, I'll go back over to Femap real quick. So in this window here, this uses VBA or Visual Basic for Applications, and that's going to be exactly the same as the stuff that you use with Excel or any other Office applications. Anything you look up with regards to VBA applies to this window here.
Great. The next question is, are there any other changes to output in the Femap API in Femap 2020.1 and above?
Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be talking about those a bit more in depth in future sessions. But if you want to look into it yourself, if you go up to Help, Programming, and up here, using the Femap API, if you expand that, there is this section 2.4, working with output in Femap 2020.1 and above. And this goes into detail on the changes that were made and how you might need to adapt any existing programs you have to be able to use the new systems.
Great. The final question is, I'm not familiar with Visual Basic. Can I use another programming language instead?
Yeah, so like I said, this API programming window in Femap supports VBA, but if you're interested in using full Visual Basic or even Python, you can move outside of this window to use those as well.
Nice. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. Will you go to the next slide, please? Great. If you're ready to take it to the next level, Saratech offers much more than just software. We have a wide variety of options for training, services, and 3D printers. So if you have any questions about that, you can always email us at marketing@saratech.com. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for upcoming dates and topics. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Allison, and have a great day.
Thanks for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any new videos. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for the latest engineering news and information. And to see all of our upcoming events, please visit our website at saratech.com/events.